Hey, everybody, welcome to SEC Weekly. He's Doug Upstone. I'm Scott Spreitzer. We are DocSports.com. Going to talk about a couple of marquee matchups in the SEC on this video. And listen, the first one that comes to mind is the big battle between Ole Miss and Alabama. The Tide leading 14.5 to 15 points as we speak. The total for the most part is 79.5. You'll recall, Doug, last year, Ole Miss played well. I mean, they gave Alabama a definite scare. But the final score was 63 to 48. In favor of the Tide. So we got a 79.5 on this total, and I've seen some 80s popping up today. Doug, Bama has played the tougher schedule. We do know that. We do know that Nick Saban is like 22-0 or whatever it is against former assistants, and he wins by almost 5 touchdowns per game. So that's the big storyline for the mass media. But an interesting, I think, storyline as far as betting is concerned and betting on props and futures and things of that nature is that we've got the co-favorites for the Heisman Trophy going at it. Ole Miss quarterback Matt Corral, Bama quarterback Bryce Young. In your opinion, and we'll talk about Bama in just a minute, but in your opinion, what does Ole Miss need to do, maybe not only just to hang this number, but to win the football game?
Well, hey, Scott, before I go into that, I have a question for you.
Sure.
What did you think about the line coming out at 20? That blew me away. I mean, it seems like that was I hate to use the term, I don't want to pick on the book, but a fairly egregious error. Now that
Absolutely.
might be correct. I'm not saying that could well be correct, but it just seemed like way overblown, and it just came down rapidly. That's probably not even the right word.
If you were at the book or didn't have a sports app for that book here in Vegas, it was a Las Vegas sports book. If you didn't have the app, you didn't have and you weren't there in person, or you weren't watching lines immediately when they came out, you probably missed this. But yeah, I mean, Doug's referring to Bama being installed as a 20-point favorite in that book. And of course, I went back and after I saw that, and I didn't get the 20. I didn't end up getting that. But I went back and I looked at my preseason power ratings before any games were played, Doug. And I had made this 19.5. Then I checked out another person in the betting business who's a real sharp, and I looked at his preseason numbers, and I do trust his power ratings. He had a 21. So I had a 19.5. He had a 21. But you can't go on preseason numbers 3 or 4 games into the season. You have to make some adjustments. And so, yeah, you're right. That 20, hey, Bama might win by 21 or more, but the bottom line is they got one-sided action before they dropped that number down. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, so I was just curious about your opinion on that. Now, and looking at Mississippi, there's a lot of things, and I guess we should let everybody know too. We're kind of changing our how we're doing this now in terms of this video. A little longer. We're going to take probably like a weekly featured game and go into it a little more depth for everybody to listen to and understand maybe a little bit more about the team. So I'm going to start off with Mississippi, as Scott said, and Ole Miss, they completed a undefeated September. Now, they did that in 2014 and 2015. Okay, so, it doesn't seem that unusual until you realize the fact the time before that was 1984. Okay, so it's not like this program or this football program, I say, has a history of great success starting early. So, but you know what? They're doing some really good things. As Scott mentioned, they have the basically the tied for the front runner of the Heisman Trophy, and and Matt Corral, I think, is that good. So I'm looking at this team, especially at offense. They like to play fast, and that's just a Lane Kiffin thing. They want to go.
Sure.
They want to keep the pressure on the defense. They're number one in total offense so far this season. Now, granted, they haven't played the stiffest of competition and have not played an SEC game yet. Nevertheless, they are moving the ball, and they're number 4 in yards per play. Okay, so it's a big play offense. Kiffin likes to throw the ball down the field, and because of how rapidly they go on offense, they can really put the pressure on opposing defenses. The other thing that's really changed in watching, I just saw the one game in particular against Louisville, and Corral has made a big adjustment let's just say becoming a smarter player, is that now he really looks off the safeties. So you'll see his head turn one way, he's looking that way, and all of a sudden he's coming back and all of a sudden he's got one-on-one coverage, okay, against the guy on the other side of the field. So I think this offense is dynamic. Okay. And as long as they get pass protection, I think they'll have a chance to really move the ball like they did last year against Alabama. Now, Scott, what do you think about either the offense or defense of Alabama?
Well, you mentioned how well Ole Miss has done in yards per play, and Bama's top 15, 12th or 13th in yards per play advantage, and they played a tougher schedule. We all know that. I don't think we've seen Bama at their very best yet. I agree with Saban. I know part of that is coach speak and how he fires up his team. There's a couple of things out of Saban that you can expect and then realize maybe how good or how not quite as good his teams are year in, year out. If he's got a team that maybe isn't quite at normal Alabama level, he's gentle. We got to work on a few things here. We got to do a few things there, that kind of stuff. When Nick Saban thinks he has the talent to win a national title, not that he doesn't every year, but you know what I mean. When he thinks his team's a little more special than maybe other Alabama teams, that's when he starts ripping them apart publicly. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. This unit has to hold up their end of the bargain, and they're not doing it thus far. And that's what we've seen out of Saban so far this season. So I think this team is one of his more talented teams overall. However, if you match up what they did last year compared to the first few games of the season, they might not look, and they don't look as good as last year's team. I think talent-wise, and by the end of the season, we'll probably think differently. But listen, I thought the meltdown, and I could be totally wrong here, but we'll find out this week. I think the meltdown against Florida on the defensive side of the football over the second half was an anomaly for Alabama. I really do. Ole Miss does have a good ground game. There's no doubt about it. So I think Alabama, for them to win this game, they're going to have to focus in on that ground game first and then bring the heat if you slow down the ground game, because the Ole Miss offensive line, especially going up against a weak schedule thus far, the Ole Miss offensive line has been shaky in pass blocking at times. They're not a good third down team. Well, they're good, but they're not a great third down team. So you got to get Ole Miss's offense to play behind the sticks, behind the chains, so to speak. You want 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7. You don't want 3rd and 1, 2nd and 2, stuff like that where, Corral can play action and get you in trouble defensively. So work on slowing down that running game because they are a good ground team. And once you do that, you start bringing some heat. You start pressuring Corral. You see if you can throw on the run. Listen, most scouts think that Corral has the strongest arm in college football, at least at the FBS level. And I think Alabama is going to show whether or not, they can handle a guy like this who is as smart as he is. As you mentioned, he's learning to look off receivers. He's learning to look at a defensive backfield and say, okay, he might be open now, but by the time the football gets there, he's not going to be open against elite level secondaries like Bama. I also think offensively, Doug, that Bama, they need to run the football right at the Ole Miss defensive front. That defensive front against the run is nothing to write home about. They're not bad, so don't get me wrong, but they're not a top-level interior line when it comes to stopping or slowing a really good run-blocking scheme, and Alabama is good at that. So I think it's a situation of Bama forcing Ole Miss a little bit out of their comfort zone, stuff that run a little bit, and get that offensive Ole Miss to play behind the sticks.
Yeah, and then in terms of what you mentioned about the offense, then too with Alabama, Mississippi had the worst defense in the country last year. I mean, they couldn't. I mean, I'll tell you what, Scott and I would have gained yards last year. Okay, right from taking the ball from the quarterback, so that would have happened. But they're better now. They've made some upgrades. They've made some changes. They brought in definitely some other transfers. So there's an upgrade. So they're holding teams. I think it's 55 yards below their season average so far. And and let's face it. I mean, Tulane and Louisville are not great teams. I'm not going to say that they are, but they're actually pretty good offensive teams. So, so there's at least something there to work with, and they're holding teams 7 points below their season average to this point. So I think that's a positive as well. Are they going to be able to stop Alabama ultimately? Boy, that's a tough call on that one. I think both teams are going to score, but in just, you mentioned the total of 80, just, this is not a pick, but just an opinion. I would think this will probably go a little bit under. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the 70s, but just maybe just not reach quite that level. So that's what I think is going on between these two teams. Scott, you got a pick for everybody here?
We're in agreement. And I want to reiterate, we've talked about this in past SEC Weekly editions that, Doug and I don't talk about the games. I have no idea who he's going to play or who he's going to give out and vice versa. And we do know what games we're talking about, but we don't, sit there and say, hey, Doug, who you like? Okay, good. I'm going to go with this team or that team or this, the over or the under. So again, we're landing on the under, both of us here in this battle between Ole Miss and Alabama. And a lot of times when I see 78, 79, 80, not that you see that a lot, but when you do, I'll tend to look to the over. But in this particular case, with what Alabama has to do defensively and offensively, and what Ole Miss wants to do with their offense, I think it's a situation where you'll probably see a game that's flirting with the low to mid 70s, but I think it stays under that total, especially now that it's ticked up to 80. So we are in agreement on the under, Mr. Another game that is very interesting, and the line is very interesting too, and I wanted to ask you about it, Doug, and that's the matchup between Arkansas and Georgia as they go between the hedges this weekend. I think the game kicks off at 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, so it's an early game for folks who want to maybe get involved with that one. But Georgia laying 18.5 to 19 points at this time, and the total right around 48.5, 49. Your thoughts on Arkansas, Georgia? I know one thing, the schedule makers did the Razorbacks no favors. You completely dominate the A&M offense. You pull a mild upset. You beat a team that before the season began was considered to be one of the teams to vie for a playoff spot. And you go in and you completely shut them down, hold them to 10 points, win by 10. Oh, by the way, great, celebrate for 38 seconds because you got the Georgia Bulldogs up next.
Yeah, that's that's life in the SEC. Also, as you're moving up the ladder, so that comes along with it. Scott, in this one now, I know you always bring up power ratings, fairly frequently, and I don't as much. But like you, I have 3 different sets of power ratings myself. And when the season started, and actually the first couple of weeks, it was what the polls are: Alabama 1, Georgia 2. Okay. Well, last week it switched on 2 of the 3. I got Georgia 1 now and Alabama 2. I really like this Georgia team. I mean, offensively, they can pound you. They have enough of a passing game, much improved over last year. And their defense, to me, it's just ultra good. I mean, they can stop anybody. And when I look at this team, I think it's, at least looking at it right today, I think it's better than the team that lost the national championship in overtime to Alabama. Okay, and you can still see where there's room for improvement because, for example, JT Daniels is not 100% healthy now. Right. So we'll see what happens there. But yet, this Arkansas, I mean, this Sam Pittman, he is doing, in my opinion, a fantastic job. I mean, just an absolutely fantastic job. They are physical on both sides of the ball. I mean, they just lay the wood to you. I mean, their defense just tore apart. I mean, I don't care that Texas A&M is playing a backup quarterback. They destroyed their offensive line. Okay, so to me, that was huge. And Arkansas's offensive line, well, the term hog certainly applies. And they remind me very much of the Brett Bielema offensive lines, except for they're better athletes. So they're better pass blockers, and they're still, though, road graders when it comes to being able to take down defensive lines. In this one, to me, the key is the Arkansas defense. If they can hold Georgia down, and with Daniels not quite 100%, as I mentioned, if they can hold them down, I think they could do a pretty good job. Now, Georgia's number 1 in total defense, but Arkansas is number 12. Okay, so I think that you have something a little bit there. For my money, Scott, the spread's a little bit high. Georgia is 0-7 against the spread off a double-digit cover. As a double-digit favorite. And Arkansas is 8-1 under Pittman if they just covered the spread. I'm gonna say put it at about 17, maybe 16, but I'm gonna say Arkansas plus the points as long as they're in that 18 to 19 range. Scott, dial it up.
And shop around because you can get 19. There are some 18.5s out there, but as my mama once said, you better shop around. Isn't that how it goes? So, anyway, there's not much I can add to it other than the fact that the only thing that scares me about Arkansas in this game, it's not the only thing, but it's probably the biggest thing, is KJ Jefferson, who is sometimes not the most accurate passer. He's connecting on less than 60% of his passes this season thus far. And if JT Daniels is 90, 95%, this will be the best quarterback they've seen this season, the Arkansas defense. So we'll have to see if that secondary can handle the Georgia passing game when it needs to, if Daniels is close to being healthy for this game. We're not quite sure if he's 75% or 95% at this point going into the later stages of the week. I do know that Sam Pittman, the head coach of Arkansas, is probably going to have a good idea on some Bulldogs personnel and what they like to do up front, because he was their offensive line coach at one point before taking this job. So he'll have a little bit of an insight onto what they might want to do up front, the kind of blocking schemes. Some teams, it's like, I'm going to refer to my days growing up as a Nebraska fan. When they were at their best, they blew teams off the offensive line. They blew teams up. They blew defensive lines up. They just blocked straight ahead. They had big boys, big farm boys, and they were also pretty quick on their feet for being the size they were. They'd punch you in the mouth. They'd knock your teeth out. And now they're doing shielding on their blocking schemes, and we see it ain't working all that well. Well, Georgia's one of those teams that, they're going to come at you. They're going to pop you in the mouth. They're not like, oh, let's move them this way and shield them off. It's more like that. And so Arkansas is going to have to withstand that kind of offensive line treatment from the Georgia Bulldogs. I'm kind of hee-hawing around here because I lean towards Arkansas. I also think the game is going to stay under. The total's not going to be a premium play for sure, and probably not the side either. But that's kind of what I'm looking at here, is the dog getting all those points, 19, and under 48.5, 49. But again, they're just opinions for me, Doug, on that particular game. It's not going to be a premium play for me.
Yeah, it's just, I think it's going to be a fascinating weekend, and this is, to be perfectly honest, everyone that's watching, this is why we, before the season, Scott and I decided to take the SEC, because now that we're going to start really getting into some conference games, I mean, it's going to be so much fun to talk about this, break this stuff down on a weekly basis, and we're not even covering, we got LSU, Auburn, kind of an underrated game in terms of where the teams are, Tennessee, Missouri, where those programs will, this might tell you where they might go, for the rest of the season. So we get, so there's just a lot of really good games that, these are the two hallmark games in our opinion. But boy, it's going to be fun, and I am really looking forward to this weekend just to see. It's a good example though, the polls versus the odds makers, because in the polls, all of these teams are relatively close, but the spreads they're not, and so that's quite a difference. And we both have a lot of history and looking at this and understanding how this works, Scott.
Yeah, good stuff. And boy, don't forget about that. You see that banner up on top there of your screen? It says free $60 account. Folks, if you're not yet a member at DocSports.com, that's a real cool way to give Doc Sports a trial run. Click on the link below the video, get yourself set up for that free $60 account, and then you can use $60, a free $60 on any of Doug Upstone's daily packages, any of mine, or anybody else on the roster at DocSports.com. And as I've said before, and I'll keep saying it, you can't beat that with a stick. All right, so check out all the plays this upcoming weekend from all the guys at DocSports.com. He's Doug Upstone. I'm Scott Spreitzer. We are DocSports.com. Let's put him in the win column, everybody.